All right. So as I was saying, I did the introduction, talked a little bit about myself. I'll also do some shameless advertising, and no, actually, I'll do that in the next slide. So things that I do actively are I'm a mentor in residence at SFU Venture Connection, director of programs at Venture Labs. Also run the Rocket Builders go-to-market and sales programs. Both of them are for companies that are growth-oriented companies in BC. We do that in conjunction with NRC IRAP. I teach introduction to business, and one of the things that is most important is I've done 5 different startups, and the ratio is 4 to 1. And unfortunately, the 4 to 1 means that 4 were failures and 1 was a success. So I probably in the normal range for technology startups with the number of the people here in BC. A little bit of shameless promotion. I also run a sailing school. It's been a lifelong hobby. For those of you who are interested, it's down at the Jericho Beach, and you can find information on it. It's at Max Sailing is the name of the sailing school. Lesley.
Yes, so I am Lesley Duncan. I am the operations director at SFU Venture Labs. I was also a co-founder of a company that was at SFU Venture Labs, and am with Dave on the 4 side, not the 1 side of the outcomes. I have also gotten experience in market research, user experience research, and program evaluation. So I spent about 10 years working in industry for a variety of companies, businesses, municipalities, post-secondary education, across the board on what are they doing? Is it working? Is it doing what they think they're doing? Kinds of questions. And prior to that, I got a doctorate in social psychology. So I also have a fairly solid background in rigorous questionnaire design and understanding people, and how they think. So that brings me here to talk about customer discovery and market research with Dave.
Okay, thank you very much, Lesley. Just a couple of comments. One of the big junctions in this competition is round 2, which is May 6th is the deadline. You need to apply because the 12th, which is next Monday, is your deadline. What you're asked for is a business model canvas, a 60-second video if you wish, and then baseline info on 4 topics. So one of the comments I want to make is that only 1 of the 4 topics is really about the product. So this is more about the business. 3 other questions are about the market, and 1 is about revenue and money. In other words, how do you get into the market? And I'll make a point and tell everybody, it's not how many words can I get on the paper, it's what's a concise, consistent answer that explains how you're going to succeed in the marketplace. Here's a look at the business model canvas. I'm pretty sure most of you are familiar with it. I would suggest that if you use this on a regular basis, it'll make it a lot easier as you progress through the different stages in the New Ventures BC competition. And I'll make a personal comment as well in that I think the most important question is how will you win in the marketplace? It's not that there's a big problem and not the fact that you have a product, but how will you move into the marketplace? What will your initial steps be? So another tip I give you is show the revenue model. How are you going to make money? How am I going to get customers and what are they going to pay me? Not just the fact that it's a huge market. Everybody understands that there are large markets out there. Tell us how you're going to enter the market and how you're going to succeed. You also don't have to have an answer for every question. So if you're saying, maybe I'm still working on talking to potential customers, work in progress is always an acceptable answer. And if you have any questions, look in the business model canvas you're working with. It will have the answers a lot of the time. So getting down to 5 pages, remember you're a sophisticated audience. Your jury is usually people who have been part of the tech community for a number of years. A lot of them are quite successful. A lot of them understand how things work, and they're familiar with a lot of the different things that are going on. You can put things in tables or in point form. It's getting the information in a concise, easy to understand manner. Make sure you talk about your company and how you will succeed rather than just about the problem and the marketplace. I mean, a good analogy would be if somebody said, we need to get more people vaccinated in BC. Everybody understands what the issue is and all the other stuff. If you are in charge, how am I going to do that is what they want to hear about. So as we go along, we're going to talk about a number of different topics. Market research, segmentation, how do we understand consumers or understand business partners? It can be B2B or B2C. What's our whole solution? In other words, the whole product. How do we position the product? And then the metrics. So if you look at the questions that are part of the round 2 submission for New Ventures BC, we're going to really try to help you with answering questions 1, 2, and 3. So just as a starter thing, before I turn it over to Lesley, a couple of slides, and that successful growth companies often start with a minimum viable product. You know, it's maybe not what they could demonstrate at the beginning, but it evolves into something which is a minimum saleable product and then an easily saleable product. So the product is demanded by the market and it includes a viable revenue model. I can make money doing it as well as people want to use it. So the other thing that's really important to have is an addressable market with an engine of growth or a clearly defined market niche. And a good example of engine of growth is Hootsuite. When Hootsuite came into the marketplace, they were leveraging Twitter. And one of the things they did is they allowed people to manage the tweets they received and manage outgoing tweets. And it was, the beginning was one of the very first social networking management tools. And they did that when Twitter had 5 million followers. So clearly, whether it's Twitter or other social media platforms that they help you work with, the engine of growth in their marketplace and their timing was superb. Couple other quick things about market research. We'll move into it. One final comment I'll make is, why do we segment? All right, everybody says you need to segment the market. In other words, it does a number of things for you. It focuses your scarce marketing and development resources on a target customer group. IBM, Google, they can sell to everybody. Small companies cannot do that. It also narrows your whole product definition. In other words, what I have to build at the beginning is smaller and less sophisticated. It also limits real competitors. A lot of the big guys aren't interested in some of the niche markets, and it's a lot easier for you to be in stealth mode for a while. If you have past success in one segment or you started in one area, it allows you to move into another one, especially if they're segments that are referenceable. And it allows the benefits of some type of market foothold or leadership to develop more quickly. One of the best ways of putting it is the customer has all the answers and all the money. And that's from Sam Walton, who is the founder of Walmart. When in doubt, listen to the customer and understand what the value proposition is for every one of the potential customers that you can talk to. Now I'm going to turn it over to Lesley and ask her to take us away with a lot of the steps in customer discovery.
All right, thanks, Dave. So I'm going to start with the value of testing your value proposition. So this is the why of market research. Why are we doing this? Why are we talking to people? Yes, they have the money, but it's a little more sophisticated than that. So really, you want to learn who your customer is. And this is that segmentation. You could sell to everyone, but who do you want to sell to? Who is that primary group that you're looking at? And then once you narrow that down, you can find out from them what their problem is and what they need in order to solve it. And so this is looking at, is your product offering that solution? And without talking to them, you can't figure that out. And when you're doing that, you can also find out, you know, would they use your solution? Possibly, but would they rather use somebody else's and why? So looking at that, what's your competitive market in there? Yeah. And then if you've determined that the product is right and it's what you want, then the next question is, well, do they want it enough to pay for it? And will they pay enough for it that there's value in you actually making it? And then finally, you're looking at, okay, they want it, they have the money, they're trying to give this money to you. Can they do that? Is there a way that they can go through that purchasing chain and actually use it and implement it, especially if you're in a B2B situation? So really, testing your value proposition means hitting each and every one of these areas. Probably not all at once. You need to start at the, you know, is there a problem before you look at scaling it? But this is sort of why you're doing this. Next slide, Dave. And so what I'm going to suggest is that we take your business hat off when you're doing customer discovery and put on your scientific hat. And so the reason that we do this is because we're coming into building a product, building a business, knowing that we have a product that we love, there's a problem out there we think that people have, and we have the best solution for it. But in order to actually really look at this, we need to test it. And in order to do that, we need to step back. And so the first question is this actually solving a problem? That's where your null and your alternative hypotheses come in. We'll hit these in a second. Then you're going to make a prediction of how is it solving this problem. Then you're going to test that, look at your responses, and then actually come up with an answer of, are you right or not? And this is where the real key is being able to say, I've done some evidence, I've done some evidence collecting, I've looked at this, and either this seems like a great idea, or maybe this is where I need to pivot. Maybe I'm not actually solving the problem I thought. So to walk you through it, let's pretend that, you know, what you're looking at is building a river crossing. So you want to get from, you think people need to get from point A to point B, and that there's this river in the way, and so you could build a bridge. So the question that you're asking is, does there need to be a river crossing here? And your hypotheses are, one, there does need to be a river crossing because people want to cross the river here. The null hypothesis to that is that people don't want to cross the river here. And you need to be able to answer and compare these two, right? So is this something that buyers or users want? And your prediction is this, people want a river crossing here. And so yes, 80% of the people that I'm going to go and talk to are going to want to cross this bridge. And if they do, then that's sort of enough to go to the next step and say, okay, how do we build a bridge? What does it look like? But the first thing to test is this a problem? And so in order to test this, you need to figure out who you're talking to. So this is the sample part that's pretty important. Who are the customers? And ideally, the customers are people who would, your sample is people who would be using this product. So it doesn't do you a lot of good to go and talk to people who are, you know, 70 miles from this river and right next to an existing bridge. They're probably not going to come to your bridge. So you're going to talk to the people who are most likely to use this bridge. And you're going to figure out what are the questions you need to ask them, how do you go and find out, and then gather all of your evidence from the people that you've spoken to. And if you get to that 80% of the people actually want to cross a bridge, then you know that you're actually going to build this bridge. People are going to come to it. But if you haven't gone through all of those steps of figuring out who is the audience, is this a problem that they have? Maybe when you talk to these people, you find out that everybody has a canoe and nobody wants a bridge. Or maybe you find out that nobody wants to cross the bridge here because there's nothing on the other side. So while you very well could build a bridge, it might not be necessary and people actually won't use it. So this is the value of customer discovery, is saying your great idea is I need to put a bridge here, but you need people to use that bridge. And so looking at it from the, is this something that people want? Is this something that people will use perspective of what's the alternative hypothesis? So next slide, Dave. So think of it, or try to think of it as a seesaw. So where we usually sit, next slide, is that we're on one side. So we're sitting on the ground. There's nothing on the other side of our teeter-totter because we think that we're right. Everybody who's in my segment wants to buy this. But really the true test is, are you trying to put things on the other side? So next slide, Dave. So are you actually testing to see if there are people who won't buy your product? Are you testing to see if this isn't really a problem? Are you testing to see if there's not enough people to buy this, or your solution doesn't quite work? So really what you want to do is still be sitting on the ground, but you want to have tried to put as much stuff on the other side of that teeter-totter as you possibly can to test if this is actually a really good solution and a really viable product. Next slide. And so really I'm encouraging you all to be humble in any of the market research that you do, because really the value and the worth of any of the time or the resources that you're going to put into doing market research is the strength of that test. You don't really want to just go out there and say, oh, do you like my product? Yes, that's great. You want to find out why they don't like it. You want to find out what's wrong with it. What problem isn't it solving for them? Because you're going to build it like it's right. And what you want to do is test it like it's not. Find out the flaws, find out the opportunities of where your assumptions aren't right. Where are you thinking that this is what people want, this is what my customer wants, and they tell you that they don't? Because you're going to get a stronger product, you're going to get a better sense of your market, your customer, and it's all information that you're going to be able to use later down the road in your marketing because your customer has told you what they like about your product. And so you can just tell them back how great this product is. Next slide. And so I want to sort of put in mind or give you some options of what types of questions you can ask depending on what stage your product or your company is at. And so if you're just at an idea stage, your questions might be really focusing in on, is there a problem? Not necessarily does a product solve it, but is this a problem? Is this something that a specific group of people, the segment that Dave mentioned, of people with shared characteristics that you can go after and find, do they all share this problem? And so you can do that by, going and talking to a few people, the relevant people who would be using your potential product, and say, hey, is this a problem you all have? That takes you to your next step, next slide, which is the MVP side. So now you've determined in your earlier research that this is a problem, it's a shared problem, and people really would like a solution to it. So then you've developed a product, you've developed the solution to this problem. You take that back to your people and say, okay, does this product solve this problem? Is it doing what I think it's doing? Is it doing this effectively? And so then you're talking to people, this might be a focus group, this might be some user experience work where you actually, give people the version of this product and say, okay, what works about it, what doesn't? Then you get that will help you develop and fine tune your product until finally you're getting to your saleable version of this. Next slide. And so now when we're looking at sales, what we're trying to say is, okay, we have this product, my segment wants it, they want to use it. How much are they going to pay for it? How are they going to buy it? Are they willing to do that? And so that's sort of looking at what's your pricing model? Who are you buying it? Who's buying it? Where are they buying it from? Which then once you've figured out sort of what that sale point is, why people are buying it, how they're buying it, then you could get into scale. So next slide, Dave. And this gets into how are you selling this at volume? How are you selling this en masse? Are enough people willing to buy it that you can actually build a large scale business on it? Looking more at marketing, more at retention, more in that sort of sales side of things. So at every aspect of your business growth, there's room and there is a need to be doing market research and customer discovery. Next slide. So the next question is, how do you do that? So if you are a company, how do you, with resources that you have available to you, do effective market research? Next slide. I'm going to say start with your business model canvas. So you're putting this together, and because this is the overarching theory of your business, and each block ties into the next one. And so making sure that you aren't basing any of these blocks on assumptions will help you not make mistakes downstream. So if you've really narrowed in on what your value proposition is and who your customer segment is, that's going to help you develop what your product features are, what you need to have, how you're going to sell it, because then you know where they are. So working through each aspect of that business model canvas and looking at your assumptions and turning those into knowledge because you've tested them and you know, is going to be really important. So start with the business model canvas. Next slide. And then come up with a plan. So once you've filled in your business model canvas, some of those, work in progress sections, that might be where you focus some of your customer discovery work. What don't you know? And look at those priority questions of what do you need to know first? Because it has impacts on those downstream things. So define those questions and then come up with a hypothesis and test it. So how will you know that you're right? And how will you know that you're wrong and that you need to change? And be really open to being wrong, because it's so much more valuable to fix something early than it is to sort of try and work around it and think that you're still right and then have to come back and undo a whole bunch of work that you've already done. And then look at, based on what those questions are, who do you need to talk to? How do you need to gather that information? What type of information do you need to know so that you can come up with that plan so that you can track your results and have that evidence in front of you. Next slide. So there's a couple of final pieces of advice that I will give you on how to go about doing this. The first is prioritize de-risking. So really look at where you're looking at investing a bunch of time, a bunch of resources, where you have the least knowledge and it's a really important area, and put your efforts there in customer discovery. So always look at what can you learn and how can that help you to do things better, faster, stronger. And final one for me, Dave, is to ask what and why. So it's easy to say, do you like this? Yes. Or do you like this? No. So you know the what. But what's really useful in developing a company and developing a product is understanding the why. So if you can say, you know what, my customers didn't really like this, but they didn't like it because it was just a little bit too heavy, then you need to prioritize looking at the weight of your object, right? What can you do to make your product lighter, make your service faster? If you just say, do they like it, yes or no, that doesn't give you any direction. So spend a bit of time with your customers digging in to find out not just what their answer is of do they like it, do they not, would they pay for it, Does this price point work? Why? Why or why not? And those are also, again, that's that information you're going to use for marketing. You're going to use it for positioning. You're going to use it to talk to investors because you know that you know your customer and you know why your product works for them. So that is my short and sweet summary of customer discovery and research. Thank you, Dave.
Great. Thank you very much, Lesley. So I think what we'll do is we are going to talk next about market segmentation, but this is a reasonable junction. We will do Q&A at the end, but also if you have questions now about customer discovery, some of the things that would be of interest to everybody, I think Lesley would be happy to take questions now, or we could save them to the end if we want.
There's one question in the chat.
There's a question in the chat. I'll read it out if that's okay. Could I ask you to maybe talk about this process a little bit in the context of non-groundbreaking ideas? For instance, Fable was solving a problem that has been solved by many before. How would you approach this when you're doing something that's sort of been done already? Thanks. Do you want to do that now, or do you want to come back to do that at the end, Lesley?
I'm good for either.
Let's go now.
Okay. So I think for this, really what you're looking at is if you're not coming up with, you're the first Uber, you're coming up with why are you different than your competitor? So a lot of the starting point will be talking to people who are currently using a similar product and say, what part of this doesn't work for you? Or what do you wish was a little bit different? Or, you know, have you thought of solving this differently? So in those kinds of situations, really what you're looking at is not focusing so much on is this product or service solving a problem that you have no option for, but it's what would make mine better, what would differentiate me from what's already out there, and why do you want that? And that's, I think, really where you want to focus that.
Okay,
number of potential customers is the next one for sample sizes. This is kind of an art and science one. So depending on what you're looking for. So if you're looking at sort of bigger picture why questions of is this a problem, you're probably looking more at sort of 10 to 15 people if they're sort of sharing characteristics. And the way to figure out where you've sort of hit is if you're hearing similar themes. So if you start hearing the same things from different people, then you're probably at a decent sample size because talking to more people isn't going to get you a whole lot of additional information. If you're looking at surveys in terms of satisfaction or something like that, less than 25 is fairly unreliable. You probably want to be at least 50. And always more is better, but resources, constraints, things like that. The real important thing is to focus on are the people filling out any of your surveys or doing your customer discovery the right people? You're better off talking to fewer of the right people than you are talking to more of the people who aren't really relevant. So going back to the bridge example, you're better off talking to 10 people who live right where your bridge is, where you want to build your bridge, rather than talking to 50 people who live further afield and it wouldn't actually be all that relevant for them. Specific tools to collect information. There is, in the New Ventures BC video library, there's a webinar that we did on customer discovery, and that has sort of a really good overview of all the tools. But for looking at Respondent.io is good if you want to do sort of in-depth interviews and you want to find people. It's really good at having a group of people who are available. SurveyMonkey or Google Forms can work for surveys. Just depends on making sure you're putting in the right questions and again, sending it to the right people. But specific tools, you don't need to make it complicated. You can get really great information as long as you've got clear questions and the right data analysis plan.
Okay, I think Tony put his hand up. Tony, do you have a question or something that you want to?
Yeah, yes, I wanted to ask, thank you, Lesley, for the wonderful presentation. I just wanted to ask you a quick question. Talking about customer discovery and the problem that you were talking about, is it possible that there could be a business problem that the people who are having it may not even know? And is there a chance that you can bring that problem to light and create a gap that may seem non-existent? And do you have any examples of companies that have found in that situation that have been successful? Thank you.
I mean, I think it's possible that companies aren't necessarily aware of a gap, but it's a much harder go. And so I think really the trick to something like that is making sure that, again, you're putting the weight on the other side of the teeter-totter. So is it actually a problem that they would be willing to solve? Because if they aren't aware that it's a problem, then you've kind of got an uphill battle of having to tell them that, yes, it is a problem, and then here's what my solution to it is. So in those kinds of conversations, I think you're definitely best doing a sort of one-on-one customer discovery conversation of saying, what are you currently using that's close? Do you experience anything, around this problem? And so it's a lot of sort of talking around of either do they have it, do they not recognize it, or do they recognize it and they just don't need to deal with it?
Okay, one more question from Peter, and then we'll move on.
Hi, I love that little hand thing. That's really useful. What about a product that is not targeting a problem, but is offering like entertainment and enjoyment? Is there any difference in that? How would you differentiate between the two, and would there be a different approach?
I think your approach is sort of the same. So the problem is, I have free time, what do I want to do with it? And so it's sort of then you're looking at, is your sample people who want this particular type of entertainment, and why would they choose that over other types of entertainment that are out there? So I think still coming back to trying to frame it as, is this the problem and what's the alternative? So your null hypothesis is people aren't going to buy my product or don't want what I'm serving, and your alternative hypothesis is people do want this product. And so the trick is trying to figure out, can you set up a conversation with your target audience to sort that out, to determine which side of that fence they're sitting on.
Great, thank you very much, Lesley. I'm just gonna take over again and move on a little bit. One thing that actually the question about Fable speaks directly to this slide. So you'll have revolutionary products like mobile devices or Internet of Things, and you'll have evolutionary products. So very clearly, Fable, when you think of them, is something that has redefined or created additional definition for the segment that they're targeting. So not everybody is trying to change the world, but at the same time, there are lots of opportunities for businesses. So one of the best ways to think of it is Steve Blank. One of the comments he makes is you say, want to go from hypotheses and beliefs to reality. And one of the best ways of thinking of it is that you'll get large companies execute on a market, startups search for a business model. In other words, they build something, they measure the response to it, and they learn from it. And one of the best angel investors in BC, one of the ways he looks at it is make a prediction, ship the product, measure the results, repeat, and see what happens again and again and again. So what you're trying to do is prove that the product fits the market and get reality from the customer, the partner, the other different groups that are part of it. And we won't go through it today, but one of the best examples of this is Steve Jobs when he was with Next Computers. And the little square that's in the corner, if I mouse over, you can see that there's a video underneath that or a link to it. It's now almost 30, it's more than 30 years old, but it's a very informative video link, and he goes through the process of understanding the market. So as we continue to move, you can also say, when I'm predicting, there's top down versus bottom up, and there's a link in this one, and it's Ali G doing what's wrong, okay? So revenue is not a function of market size and penetration rate. So if I have a $1 billion market, and I'm going to get 2% of the market, it means I'll make $20 million in revenue. But if I cannot tell you who the specific customers are, I'm making a mistake. So top-down tells you the market's worth it. In other words, I can go into this marketplace and I can succeed, but revenue is a function of the leads you attract. How many of the leads do I convert? What's the price? And individual customers. You can almost turn it into linear algebra. The number of leads, percentage times price equals revenue. So I said before, top-down is valuable. When I look at this, you've got your whole theoretical market includes all 10 of the segments that I've done in this little bowling alley diagram. And it's neat But the reality is all the small companies in the new ventures beat competition. There's no way you can sell to the theoretical market. You can't sell to all of these 10 mega segments. That could be Google or IBM or Microsoft can do that, but it tells you that the market is indeed valuable and worth it. Bottom up is more about which segment am I going to target right at the beginning. So there's a group of individuals that are separated by distinguishable and noticeable aspects. And I can go and say, if it's B2B, what's the available budget that's there? How many of them can I reach? How many of them will show interest or be attached? How many will I convert into a real lead? And finally, what's my win rate going to be? How are these things going to move ahead? I think that it's important to go through all the different steps to be realistic in terms of your bottom-up financial prediction and how you're going to put it together. And this comes up with the sort of concept of the headpin segment. And it's to target a single niche market segment with a must-have value proposition. So I want to identify a segment that you can go in and dominate, or maybe even just get a toehold, somewhere where leadership in that segment is really important. And I can leverage leadership to win over adjacent segments. In other words, I can go into the second row of some of the different segments that are in the bowling alley. But for an early stage company, you cannot talk about where you're going to be in 3 years or 5 years at the beginning. You got to talk about what you're going to do in the next 6 to 12 months, because that's what indicates whether you'll even get a chance at the second or third row of the segments that are part of the bowling alley. Another way of looking at it is, if I only do top down, I can say, here's a mega market, here's us. And I could be all around the market, but never show how I'm going to intersect into it. Or I could show this is exactly where I'm going to go. What part of that market will I go into first? And the top diagram is what you really want to be and how you want to explain your market penetration strategies. So we got a whole series of questions here, and we're going to do some polls. So I'm going to ask Angie if they could deploy the first one. I told everybody earlier on that Max Sailing is the sailing school that I run down at Jericho. We're one of the biggest sailing schools, we're the biggest in Canada, actually. And the question is, Max Sailing sold jackets. 4 or 5 years ago, we added fancy sailing clothing to our website, e-commerce, all that stuff. How many did we sell in the first year? Okay. Is it 0 to 10, 10 to 25, 25 to 100, 100, you know, actually, I think the bottom option should be 100 to 500. So let me know, what do you think? And I can tell you what the real answer is. You know, think about it. Nice clothing, Helly Hansen, very recognizable brand. Something that would really help you if you wanted to stay warm, depending on when you're going, and all the other different things. So let's give it another 15 seconds and we'll get a few more people to help answer the question for us. And then we'll go at a minute, we'll turn this one off. Thanks to the 45 and climbing people who've answered it for us. That's about a minute. So Angie, can you publish the results for everybody?
I'll try, hold on.
Share the results. I can do that. Everybody can see that, right? So 25% of you, 28% are pessimists, and the other 72% are saying that we sold a fair number of jackets, and the majority are in the 10 to 25 range. So I wish that came true. We sold 2 jackets. Okay, folks? We sold a total of 2 jackets the first year, because it turned out that, you know, we also supply wetsuits for free. We do a whole bunch of other things. And people were not used to buying sailing clothing, high-end sailing clothing, nice sailing clothing at a community center, early stage sailing school. So the product market fit wasn't good for that product. So I'm just going to move on and keep going. So key things here, and I think Lesley alluded to a lot of these things, are that at the beginning, when you understand the market, you go from when you sit there as a team and go, here's my internal focus. I have a product with features, and maybe I have lots of features. Every time I talk to somebody, I'm a little bit reactive in my R&D, and it's a little bit unpredictable as to exactly what I'm going to do with my company, with the product. And where you want to go is to have an external focus and understand what customers value. How am I different or differentiated from other products that are in the marketplace? What will be my headpin segment? And then how will I get a reliable customer base that I can market to? and provide information to on a regular basis? How am I going to be able to understand the market? Next one is we look at buyer internet behavior. And this is an interesting thing in that this slide is a little old, but we know that 81% of the worldwide internet population begins with search, and that number is now higher. It's over 90%. So even if you're a very traditional company, people look on the internet to find you. So if you don't have a website, you don't have the ability for people to find you, especially during the pandemic we're in right now, it's incredibly hard to do business. So one of the key things is you can't just say, I'm doing these things, but you have to communicate it. You have to make sure you're discoverable and that people can determine what you're doing. So other things that are important is to understand, I may have an absolutely fantastic product. And when we think about that, I look in the left. So if this little diagram here, what are the usage patterns throughout the buying process? So, what's the opportunity? And I go from, I'm aware I have a problem. So what's the technical solution? I'm comparing things. How important is the solution that it meets my needs? And then as I go through consideration and then in the decision phase, it's interesting how brand goes to the top. And one of the great lines in B2B is that nobody ever got fired for buying Microsoft Office. So, you can have a great technical solution, but you also have to go and say, the buying behavior isn't just about the technology. It's about a number of different things. And I need to be able to go through the buying process in order to figure this out. So quick question, how many people are involved in the buying technology business survey? So it's often called the buying unit, all right? How many people are involved in a company when they need to buy something? If you're under 10 people in a small company, quite often one person decides. The larger the organization, the more people are involved. What this does is it slows down the buying process. You need to have more than one argument. Technical, who's the division that's going to actually use it? You need to know what the user is going to say. What do the managers want? What do the financial people find interesting? There's a whole series of people in the decision-making unit. The larger the company, the more people are involved. If it's government, it's even larger again, because there's a lot more risk mitigation in government, trying to make sure you do exactly the right thing and you follow a very fair and open process. So when we look at the participants in a buying process, we can usually put them in 5 different categories. The users are part of the organization, people who influence the organization. In other words, quite often a consultant can be hired. Somebody's doing that. Who's the actual buyer? Who's the person who's going to select? Who are the deciders? And eventually, are there gatekeepers? So a really good way of thinking of it is that if you look at Safeway, which POS software do they use on the cash registers and things like that? The users are usually represented by the managers. So we'll go out and ask a little bit about what's going on. You'll have influencers. It could be part of Safeway or a group of consultants who say, these are the new interesting solutions that are available. And the buying group or the buyers and the deciders can be everything from technical to network people to financial people. And the gatekeepers are the people who protect their time and make sure that everybody's able to understand how things are going to work out and how they're going to make the decision. We have a question about price point, but we'll come back to that one a bit later. What I'm going to do right now is I'm just going to keep going for a little bit longer, and we'll come back to the pricing aspect of decision making. So one other key comment here is third-party validation. You look at, are we influenced by what other people say? And it's very clear that negative comments have an impact, positive comments have an impact. And really, we don't necessarily just trust our own comment. We think about what others are saying, and we use that as part of our decision-making process. So let's go to another poll really quickly. Angie, I think if you could deploy this one, we may have shortened it just to the second question. But if I'm looking for a hotel room, and most of us haven't done that in the last year, hopefully we'll get back to doing that a little bit later on. But do you look at the comments in the comment section, yes or no? And then when you're looking to book a hotel room, do you insist that it's everything you want, even if it costs more? Or do you sit down and say, these are the most important things that I'd really like to have and I value? How do you make a decision about that? We've been doing this for about 30 seconds. If everybody could have a quick go at the poll, that would be great. We'll keep it open for another 20, 25 seconds or so, and we'll see how things work. All right, so another 10 seconds for everybody who wants to try to go in and give us a bit of data, help us out, that'd be good. So we're at about a minute now. So Angie, if we could end the polling and then show the results. So it's interesting, you know, when you book a hotel room, it turns out the majority of us will look at the most important thing. One of the things I didn't do here was show a difference in price. So some people could be assuming I can get everything for a small additional cost. Others may assume that there's a larger gap. But the real moral in this poll is that if I talk to, in this case, 52 people, I may not need to meet the needs of everybody. In other words, if I want to limit what my product is when I first go into the marketplace, it may be a lot easier for me to limit what I do for my minimum viable product, but know that I still will have pretty good reach into the marketplace. So again, something that echoes along these lines and follows up is, do you need to build every feature potential customers ask for? The answer is no. Or you could delay and say, you know, I like that feature, but it'll be part of our next release. So we'll have another product version coming out a year from now, and it'll be available to you then. So why or why not? A lot of the time, people will buy your product anyways. You know, they'll accept that it doesn't have 100% of everything, but if it's good value for money, they'll be pleased with that. The other thing too is that it really limits your scope, and the differentiation may be based a lot more than just your product. So they may really want to buy from you because one of your partners is somebody they deal with all the time and they trust that partner. And that partnership actually allows you to sell to them. A really good example is being in the App Store or being in the Android store. The fact you're listed there makes people think it's a good product and they feel safe purchasing it. So both of those things are important when you look at it from different ways of sort of looking at the market and segmenting it. So what I'd like to do is I'm just going to go over and play a short video. So I'll stop the share and then I'm going to play this one actually using just going to play this, going to maximize my screen and play somebody we all recognize, a gentleman called Sheldon.
First there was PlayStation, aka PS1, then there's PS2, PS3, and now PS4, and that makes sense.
Maybe I'll share my screen, that'll help too. So let's do that again. I'm going to start over at the beginning.
There was PlayStation, aka PS1, then there's PS2, PS3, and now PS4, and that makes sense. You'd think after Xbox, there'd be Xbox 2, but no. Next came Xbox 360, and now after 360 comes Xbox One. Why one? Maybe that's how many seconds of thought they put in the name of it. Can you get the butter, please? Yeah, however, with the Xbox One, I can control my entire entertainment system using voice commands. Up until now, I've had to use Leonard. It's the other one. Pass the butter? Dude, hang on. I don't feel like you're taking this dilemma seriously. Fine, Sheldon. You have my undivided attention. Okay, now, the PS4 is more angular and sleek looking. No way! It's true. But the larger size of the Xbox One may keep it from overheating. You wouldn't want your gaming system to overheat? Nope, you absolutely would not. And furthermore, the Xbox One now comes with a Kinect included. Included? Yes. Not sold separately. Although the PS4 uses cool new GDDR5 RAM, while the Xbox One is still using the conventional DDR3 memory. Why would
Okay, so when you think about it, there's a variety of different things that are important in the way things are set up. So what we'll do is go back to the PowerPoint. Any questions or comments? When we look at Sheldon, you need to align your messages to the way real people think. And I think it's an important thing to understand that he's a very technical buyer, but he isn't necessarily symptomatic of the whole marketplace. So one of the suggestions we have a lot of time for people is to build a competitive matrix. So if you're sitting there and you're saying, I'm interested in other competitors, how do I compare myself to them? So when you look at this one, if you read down the left-hand column, a couple of things are really important. What are your key products and what are the key product features don't appear until numbers 5 and number 7 on the list. So there's a whole series of different ways of competing. We had the question earlier on about Fable, and it's very clear that their ability to allow you to shop online and then deliver in a very niche-oriented, specific type of product was a key part in their success. So they were able to compete in a certain way or in a certain fashion, and their value proposition was different from, you know, IKEA or some of the other potential large competitors that you would lump in with them. So I'm just going to move on to whole product. Are there any questions we'd have right now? Any things, Angie, is there anything we should deal with, or should we just keep going?
There's one question related to purchase price. Do you want to do that now, or?
Yeah, maybe you could read that one out and we'll do purchase price.
Okay, does the purchase price point help determine the speed of the purchase, as you don't need to go up the food chain to get approval for the purchase?
Well, it's in two parts. If you're talking B2C, the most important or big purchases that people will make could usually be a house or an apartment and then a car. And quite often they will use a real estate agent or a car salesperson to help them make that purchase. So the larger the value, the more consultation there is in B2C. In B2B, there are certain things that people can purchase just based on discretionary purchasing. Remember years ago, one of the companies I was with sold an interesting networking product, and we priced it at $950 because a lot of network administrators in large companies were able to buy a product which was under $1,000 and put it on their credit card. They're allowed one a month. So the real answer is in B2B, usually around $1,000 or up is kind of what discretion is. But it also take a look and say, is it something that people can buy in this year's budget, or does it have to go into next year's budget? Is it within a division or within one office, or does it have to go to head office? All of those things add complexity and add time to the buying process. So just want to talk a bit about whole product as we move on. A lot of the time, there's a whole series of things that are part of the whole product. There's your physical product or your software, all the other associated factors, which is the services, the partners. I talked about the Android store and iOS earlier on. There's the warranties, the guarantees, all of those things are part of the whole product. And some of them are very tangible. Others are things you can't see. It's people's beliefs about the product. And it comes around to the idea that what do I need to solve my whole problem, if you want to call it. So a good way of looking at it, and this comes right out from Jeffrey Moore from Crossing the Chasm, is that there's a whole series of complementary services and complementary products that are part of B2B for sure, and even some B2C purchases. So if I look at getting internet connectivity, and I'm doing it in an apartment, how much do I want to buy? What type of equipment? What am I going to do in terms of all the different things that are there? But in terms of B2B, there's a whole series of things. So there's hardware, software, peripherals. A lot of the time, pre-sale services and post-sale support are very, very important. Company after company has customer success people now. I think Thinkific is a good example of that. People buy, but then they have people to make sure they get the value from the product afterwards. So when you look at it, it's not just the services and the product, but it's also the relationships, and it fulfills the value proposition and their compelling reason to buy. So here's a good question for you. We've got two products, hotel for vacation travelers, hotel for business travelers. The value proposition is different. The whole product for each of these two groups is quite different. Okay, so if you look at all the different things that are there, you can see that people are on vacation as a family or even as a couple are different than business travelers who are in and out of town for a quick business meeting, have a number of things that are different that are part of it. And when I look at this, quite often people are attracted not by, all six things. There can be one thing that's really, really important. And the example I always use is, my son played hockey and would often go in a hockey tournament in the Seattle area, and they would stay as a group in a hotel for vacation travelers. And the key thing that all of them wanted to know about was the breakfast buffet. So when you think about it, teenagers playing sports a lot, there's one key value proposition. They would never go to a business hotel because it didn't have a buffet breakfast. That was the total decision-making feature for that one specific group of people. Another example here is Dunkin' Donuts versus Starbucks. And we'll go back and we'll think about this. You can find it on the internet. A number of years ago, Dunkin' Donuts thought, well, we're competing with Starbucks, and Dunkin' Donuts is the Tim Hortons of the United States. We need to understand how we're different. How do we differentiate ourselves? How do we compete better with Starbucks and stuff? So they thought that the best way to do this, they would take 100 people who are Dunkin' Donuts fans and give them a card so they could go to Starbucks for a month. They do the same thing with 100 Starbucks aficionados. Say, here's a card. We want you to go to Dunkin' Donuts for a month. And we want you to experience the other chain and see how they're different. So here's another poll. And the question here is, what percentage of the people switched after a month? What percentage? Is it 0 to 5%, 5 to 10%, 10 to 25? And one of the key things to remember here is to understand that they had a whole month to figure this out, and they could spend some time doing it. So I think we've got a couple of answers right now. We're getting a fair number of them come in. There's some interesting quotations from the people who talked about stuff when they were doing this, and we'll just let it run for another 30 seconds or so that we can get a few more votes in. All right. So quick question then is, so maybe we could end the poll, but we can share the results. Okay, here are the results. So 15% of you are saying 0 to 5%. The majority are pretty low, 5 to 10%. And then, the numbers vary a little bit. So the really interesting answer here is the answer was 0. And it turns out that they're from two totally different tribes. And the comments from people were quite interesting. The people from Starbucks were like, well, I go to Dunkin' Donuts and it's got Formica tables, everybody's wearing baseball caps. It was a very different ambiance. And then people who are from Dunkin' Donuts would go to Starbucks and say, well, you go there and they have sofas and they have all these things that I don't normally eat. The best line was one guy who said it was like spending Christmas Day with people that you don't know. So there was a real variety of comments from people. And it turns out they're very different groups of people, and it's nothing to do with the coffee. It's about the experience and it's about the ambience. So when I'm going to move on again. We're a little bit, in terms of time, we want to get things moving. So we're just over an hour right now. We'll look at positioning. And really the key definition for positioning is, why will they buy from us versus our competition? Why will some people buy one car but not another? And positioning can actually be defined. It's managing the product and its presentation to fit a predetermined place in the mind of the customer. Or it's market segmentation and competitive differentiation. And I talked about product management at the very beginning of this webinar. And really this is where it comes down to is, how do I go to each market segment and make sure people understand how I'm different and match their needs? So other definitions, it could be perceived status within a market. building a relationship to secure and communicate competitive advantage, all the different ways of explaining your positioning of the product to a potential buyer. So another poll, my wife drives a very safe car. What type of car does she drive? And they're in alphabetical order. Ask everybody to say, which is the very safe car? What do people say? Why are they saying it? Which are the ones that are there? And what are the answers? So Mark has asked a question, is what year is the car? And with a smile beside it, I'll tell him that it actually doesn't matter, okay? Within reason. So get there. Yeah, somebody else says 1970 to now. Okay, so we've got a fair number of answers. Angie, if we could wait another 10 seconds and then share the results. Here we are. So we get BMW. Chevy doesn't seem to get any votes, neither does Hyundai. Toyota is in number 2, and number 1 is Volvo. It's interesting, 50% of people are picking Volvo. And that's correct. Volvo has always had the positioning as the safest car in the marketplace. What's also interesting is they haven't won a safety award in over a decade. So it's the positioning and everybody's impression of the company. So I'll tell you the truth, my wife is Swedish, and I think that Volvo isn't necessarily the safest car. I think it's code for very expensive spare parts. So anyways, as we move on, how does positioning impact you? It makes it easier for me to get the partnerships I want. We had a question earlier on about pricing. If I have high quality or I have a high impression in one space, maybe I can obtain a price premium. Makes it easier for me to build a whole product. My sales cycle might be shorter, and it improves my company valuation, does all sorts of different things for me. So if you want to sit down, and for all of you, you can go through an exercise to describe your product to potential customers. And here we see the standard 6 statements, which is the customer, what do they need? My product is, this is how I'm differentiated. My whole product is this. And then I develop my positioning statement. So there's a whole series of steps you can go through. And it, again, comes from Crossing the Chasm with Jeffrey Moore. So I can then turn this into a positioning statement. On the left, there is a whole series of statements or questions. Who's the target customer? And then the positioning statement goes for who our product is, that unlike our key product differentiation. And one of the things you can do as an exercise is to understand what this is for your potential product or solution. It's not something you publish. This is an internal document, but it explains how you fit into the marketplace. So here's the one for the iPod. I'll give everybody a moment or two to just read this one really briefly. So it's interesting in that this was the original positioning statement for the iPod, and it was written 2 years before they ever bought the product into the marketplace. And it's not the same positioning that they had 10 or 12 years later. So the first statement for mobile high-income individuals, original product sold for almost $600. So one of the things that this tells you is that it was for, in those days, the same people who would buy Blackberries. In other words, the same people who are interested in being able to do things while they were mobile. And it was at the very beginning of the mobile revolution of new products all the time. One of the things that people talk about is what was the key value proposition. And if we were able to interact more and ask everybody, we get a number of votes. But for me, one of the key things was that it had the music library that was integrated in the service, and it always worked. Because I remember having 2 of these, one for my daughter who could read properly. Our younger brother got a cheaper one, and the cheaper one I threw away after a week because I just couldn't get the music onto it. It was too difficult. We talked about Starbucks earlier on. Here's another example. It goes way back to 1985, but it's still valid today. So I'll let everybody read this one a little bit as well. But when you think about it, we're going, all the way down. The 2 things I like are the last 2 statements. the unlike part is he's not comparing himself to another chain. He's comparing himself to the old way of doing it, which could be at home or maybe in one of the gas stations or something like that. And his real value proposition at the end is that we're making coffee a new way, providing a unique environment for drinking it. And this has evolved now so that Starbucks wants Starbucks to be the third place that you spend all your time. When the pandemic's over, that's more valid, but it's at home, at work, and at Starbucks. So they want it to be the same level of involvement and experience that you would have if you were doing something where you were making coffee at home. So this translates into other things. So we think of FedEx and what is FedEx? And the tagline for this company is on the door. And this is the second most recognizable tagline that FedEx has had. The first one was when it absolutely positively has to get there. And this one is now the world on time. As the company continues to grow and evolve, they purchased office supply companies all over the world. Now it's, your office anywhere globally. So the company, as it grows and evolves, their tagline and their positioning statement moves along with it. So the acid test for your product positioning, and quite often when people send stuff to us, I review some of the business plans, and I'm one of the judges for one part of the New Ventures BC competition. And I'll take the product positioning statement, the simple one line, and put it into Google. And if it takes me to the IBM webpage, I know that the positioning statement isn't accurate enough. So if your competitor's product can be used as a substitute, then there's a difference in there. And if there's a real value proposition or compelling reason to buy and a key differentiator, it's a very strong way of doing things. So now I'm just going to touch on really the last topic before we get into a bit of metrics, which is about pricing and value. What are some of the common pricing objections you hear? Is your price too high or too low? Lesley did a really good part on customer discovery and gathering information. Pricing is really difficult to do in some of the traditional fashions. If you ask somebody, do you want to pay $5 or $10? The answer is predictable. But what you need to understand is, how does your pricing model compare with the industry, with your competition? Will you offer promotional pricing or will you discount? And I'm not a big fan of discounting. I'll tell you that right now. If you're an embedded product, what are your licensing alternatives? And is there a discount that's provided to a reseller? And have you accommodated that in the pricing model you have at the very outset? So as a way of looking at it, pricing is a combination of what are my costs? In other words, I have to be higher than my cost, otherwise I can't make money. What's the market price? What's the equilibrium point in the marketplace? And what's my value of the product to the buyer? And if I want to be a premium product, I can't have a discount price. The two of them are contradictions. It doesn't work. So again, I hear this a lot, and people say, I need to have a low price to compete when you enter the marketplace. No, you actually compete on differentiation. Price, especially if it's really low, will actually make it very difficult for you to compete in the marketplace, and people get the wrong impression of your product and your company. So final one, as I said before, we'll take a look at marketing metrics and analytics. There are some really good tools you can use, even if you have a very simple website. What's your Alexa rating? What are your Google Analytics? Google just changed the algorithms recently, so it rewards the right type of content and it rewards things that people are looking for. So you can spend a bit of time just tuning we'll call it the text and the contents on your website. There's some neat products out there by companies. Unbounce is a great Vancouver-based product, which does landing pages, so you can test if people like this landing page or another one. Kissmetrics from Seattle, HubSpot out of Boston, and Hootsuite, of course, is a very Vancouver-centric company that's successful, really very effective for social media. One I will tell people about is an internet marketing guide. It's a really good download from HubSpot. You can find it on their website. They have all sorts of really interesting free ebooks. And that's what this one is. It had over 160,000 copies downloaded in the last while. And a couple of years ago, They have a whole variety of different tools you can find, and it helps you from everything from optimizing your website, nurturing leads into customers, and analyzing and refining your data. So quick question for everybody. Let's do one more poll. How often do you check your Google Analytics? So how do you do that means that you really don't have an answer. If you want to change that answer, there you are. So, I mean, Google Analytics, it's really easy. It's part of the Google Suite. You can go and find it. And it'll tell you all about your traffic, where it's coming from, how it does things, all sorts of different pieces like that. So we've got a number of votes in. We'll give it another 10 or 15 seconds. One of the things I'll say is that I run the sailing school at Jericho, and Jericho is more recognized than the name of the sailing school. So our Google Analytics tell us that most of our leads come from the Jericho Sailing Center website, and others they come from another building. So you can see the results. Some people do it daily. My belief is that every time you make a change to your website or you upgrade some of the things you're doing, you should be checking your Google Analytics. Or if you're doing some marketing, let's say I'm going to do a whole marketing campaign next week, I should be checking them now, I should be checking them during the campaign, I should be checking them afterwards to see if they make a difference. In other words, how are the metrics and do they work? Just going to comment finally on a little bit on social media. Again, this is a little while ago. So 93% of all B2B marketers are engaged in some form of social media marketing. And we look at some of the more popular channels, one which is, there's two that I think are growing in the marketplace. LinkedIn is becoming more and more influential in B2B, and Instagram is becoming more and more something that companies are interested in. There's a whole series of tools in your B2B toolkit for doing this. This includes some of the products we recognize today, some of the older ones which are fading. But the real answer is, you have to decide what you're going to do. And if there's a list of 10 different social media tools, I don't think you want to do all of them. Early stage companies, you need to be selective and specific. So which are the top two or maybe top three social media tools you're going to use, unless that is the absolute basis of your business. So if you're a clean tech company or a medical device company or something like that, which of these could be LinkedIn, it could also be very industry specific sites or publications are going to give you the right market reach and help you communicate people so you get inbound traffic. So a couple of customer validation metrics to come up with right at the end here. We'll sort of take a look at that. And we have a question from Michelle we'll come back to later. But customer validation metrics, what's your average order size? How long is this customer? What's the lifetime value of the customer? In other words, are they going to be my customer for a year? Let's say it's a telco. We have in Vancouver or BC, we have a choice of TELUS, Rogers, or Bell is usually who we think of. What's the lifetime value of that customer? If I sign on with one of them, am I likely to change? What's the average first time to get an order? The larger the sale volume, the more big business oriented it is, the longer it takes. How many more companies can I put in my sales pipeline? How do I improve my close rate? And finally, how much revenue per employee or salesperson can I expect to have when I'm scaling my company and growing? But Michelle had a quick question, and I will go back one. And which will be the top two for your company? This very much depends on your company. If you're B2C, it's probably Facebook and Instagram. If you're trying to promote something which is more in the media, let's call it new media, let's say it's about the latest news and stuff like that, it could be Twitter. If it's a business-to-business section, which is, let's say it's oil and gas, it's probably industry site-specific publications. And then everybody wants to know who you are. So if it's B2B, having a LinkedIn profile that makes them believe that you're a real person can be important as well. So we've done that one. A couple of examples of metrics, some of the companies you can use. We've mentioned this before, Kissmetrics, Hootsuite, and HubSpot. And we'll come around to, we're not going to define them today, but CAC is your cost to acquire a customer and what's the lifetime value. So if I acquire a customer and it costs me approximately $50, I keep them for 2 years and the subscription is $120. I know that, you know, 240 minus 50, I make $190 on average off each customer. So it's an important way of looking at things that way. And then we'll go right down. Couple of final things: marketing, execution, and budget. Question for everybody, and I think you need to sit there and say, how many of you have a product that sells itself? In other words, it's going to sell and people will find you. One of the realities that people have to understand is quite often there are a lot of people who look for new stuff on the internet, and if somebody finds you and you meet their needs, they'll buy from you. But that's not a symptom of the whole marketplace. So one of the other questions you need is, how will you spend your marketing budget? And marketing budget can be money and it can be time. So if you need to spend a bit of time posting on social media, building up the image of your company, making sure people understand your product, it's how much time and effort are you going to put into that? Which tools will I use to make it easier? Will I go to trade shows once they are reopened after the pandemic ends? All the different things which are part of marketing execution and spending money the right way. So final comment would be, for each segment, I'd identify which method you will use. There's a whole series of things you're going to do, pros and cons, then prioritize each method for each segment. And then for priority segments, only the priority segments, create a budget of money and time. And got one final pour for everybody before we close. How many segments will you target initially? Let's ask everybody, those who are still with us. How many will you target? Right, so we're doing all right in terms of responses and stuff. Let's wait another 10 seconds if we could, and then we'll sort of close this one off and show everybody the results. And I have on the bottom of the slide, I say if it's more than 3, you're fired. You can have more than 3 if one of them totally references from another. In other words, you get one of them for free. And maybe you get customers from a 4th segment, but you spend no time and effort marketing to them. They come to you and you opportunistically service them, or you opportunistically have them as clients. So there's a lot of it. Again, the idea behind segments is you can't do everything. Where do you start? And what do I do? So a lot of the answers were 1 and 2, which is kind of what you would think. Comment from a gentleman called Kevin Swan from Inovia Capital. Really have to remember what type of company you're building. Most startups turn into small businesses. I know my sailing school is nothing more than a small business. It's not scalable. It's got a physical location. You can figure what the business model is. And Kevin was a venture capitalist. And a lot of the time, these companies are not disruptive. In other words, VCs will not invest in them because they're not convinced they can get their money back with the 10 times premium. So one of the other things he said, which is very real, is that all of them will market via the internet today. And that's more and more important, and very important during the pandemic. So a couple of resources for you. I've talked about a number of books that are there. They help you go from first customer to first market, users and revenue, and target marketing. And if any of you are having trouble sleeping, the Startup Owner's Manual is a great book, but it's about 600 pages long. And there's times when it will cure insomnia. So it's a good thing. And Steve Blank did a really good job, but boy, it's a bit of a read. Here's my contact information again. And I think that's everything, unless I'm, yep, that's everything. And we now have, we have some questions, and we can go through the questions a little bit. We've got about another 5 minutes to go. So a question from Alessandro. We didn't talk much about branding. How important is brand for a company? So one of the things I'd comment is that positioning is actually a part of branding, and how you post on social media. What is your price? Who are your partners? How do you enter the marketplace? All of these are, they combine to be branding. So I didn't actually talk about branding in general, because I actually find that it doesn't help you then put things into the little pieces you have to do. But you know, positioning is actually the key thing about branding. What do people perceive about the product? It doesn't have to be the most expensive. It doesn't have to be the best. It's what do people think of it? So, you know, really take all the pieces together, and that's how you create the brand that everybody has. Are there any other questions? Got a couple more minutes.
There was one from earlier that was to me, Dave, if I can jump in.
Absolutely. I'm going to stop sharing and we'll go back to the things. Lesley, please go ahead.
The question was regarding idea stage market research. I have questioned and talked to around 10 to 12 people, and the trend seems to be that there's a lack of awareness but willingness to solve given an opportunity which the product will be. So basically it sounds like there's a set, nobody's really voicing the problem themselves, but when a solution is presented, they seem like they'd want to try it. And I think in terms of how to sort of get at that a bit more in the research is to say, go back on those interviews you've done and look at what you were talking about or how they explained the problem, not how you're explaining the problem. Because really you want to see what they're like, what was it that made them go, oh, that, okay, yeah, I would have a solution to that. So maybe it's how you're describing it. Maybe you're thinking that it's doing something that's different than what they're thinking. So really go back into that material that you already have and really look at what's the difference of what made it click for them of, oh, this could be something that could be useful, is I think the first step on that of where are you looking at it differently than how they are.
Okay, thank you. Another question.
Also, sorry, a related question for you, Lesley, on how customer discovery applies to biotech.
The principles are the same in biotech. I mean, the slightly more complicated thing in biotech is depending on the product, who you're talking to. So are you talking to the end user? Are you talking to the purchaser? Are you talking to the physician who's prescribing it or needing to use it? So biotech can be a little more complicated depending on what it is that you are building.
I think also biotech often is defined by the regulatory process.
Yeah.
So if you look at AbCellera, they could talk to all sorts of people about wanting a vaccine, but the regulatory process defines it a fair bit. And also a partner quite often. If you were to go and partner with somebody who's in the marketplace, they may have information that really helps you. There's another question from Ali. He says, we are selling to big grocery stores, but their decision-making process is too long. Is there any way to expedite the process? I wish I could say I knew something that would help you out. One of the things I would suggest you could do is practice on the smaller guys. You know, if things don't work out, you've only, you know, it's a smaller chain, if you want to call it, or a smaller group of stores. And it allows you to get feedback faster. It allows you to have a little bit of a, we'll call it, I have a success story. Maybe you get a testimony for a smaller guy, which makes it a lot easier to sell to the big grocery stores. Anything else? Any other questions? Anything else? Angie, from your side, is there anything else?
No, I think we'll call it time there. So thank you, Dave, and thank you, Lesley, for taking us through all that information. It was great. I have posted the slides for anyone who needs them, so feel free to use those. And if you haven't seen that LEG top-down versus bottom-up video, it's pretty funny. I recommend.
You may not want your kids in the room when you watch it, but that's beside it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then, yeah, we're doing seminars pretty much every Wednesday at 1 o'clock. So next week will be on pricing with Stephen Forth and Karen Chang. So they've talked a bit about pricing, but we'll do a deeper dive on that next week. So thanks everyone for attending. We will send out a survey to get your feedback. So please do share if you have any comments. Otherwise, any last words, Dave or Lesley?
No, make sure you enter next Monday.
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
Yep. So deadline is Monday, and
okay.
yeah, the video will be up tomorrow sometime. So we'll have the link up. All right. Thanks again, everyone, and have a good rest of your day.
Okay. Bye.
Bye. Take care, everyone.